You are listening to the Makers Church podcast. For more information about our community, please visit makerschurch.org.
Hey guys, welcome. My name is Shalise, and I'm one of the pastors here at Makers Church, and you are joining us midway through our new series called Reclaimed Rituals, Lent at Makers. And last week we had the opportunity to hear from Pastor Mark about confession and about how confession is just bringing the truth and making the truth known. Can we give a big hand for Pastor Mark last week? Such an awesome talk. And this week we're talking about worship, which I'm particularly excited about. For those of you who have not known me for very long, I actually am a former worship leader. I like to think I'm still practicing, but when you have people like Chelsea and Taylor and Ethan, you don't need me anymore. But I used to lead worship, and I remember when I was little, and I wanted to be a worship leader. Like, I loved singing, but I was not very good at it. And so I remember being really little, and I could just sing louder than everybody else. So it was like I was leading because I was the loudest one in the room. And I remember having this, really clear moment when I was probably about 15 or 16, and I had a conversation with God, and I was like, God, I'm going to keep singing. So either you're going to have to give me a better voice, or you're going to have to deafen the people around me, because we're doing this, I was like, I just love worship. And so I was excited when we were talking about reclaimed rituals and this idea of worship, that worship is this ritual that we engage in during this Lenten season and beyond. And I was thinking first, why ritual? What does it mean to have a ritual? I'm reading this book right now. It's called God Was in This Place, and I Did Not Know. And I opened up to the next page that I was supposed to read, and wouldn't you know it, the first word, ritual. And I thought, I love the way that this author, Lawrence Kushner, talks about ritual. He says, ritual, we realize, asks us to do very simple things with childlike devotion. But we soon realize that once we have performed them enough times to master their moves and shed our self-consciousness, our mind wanders. To our embarrassment, we realize we cannot do even simple religious acts without thinking about other things. The ground of my being asks that I ritually recite 6 words proclaiming God's unity each morning, and I can't even keep my mind from wandering. Religious rituals are a funny sequence of things we do to help us remember that we have forgotten why we have been created and gently provide us with the instruments of return. They're ancient techniques for sending us back to everyday life with a childlike sense of wonder. I love this, that the purpose of ritual is not actually to take us outside of our everyday lives, but it's to provide an occasion for us to experience God within our everyday lives. And so why worship? Now, when most of us think of worship, we probably think about the songs that we sing on a Sunday. Traditionally, we call this time our time of worship. But in Isaiah 29:13, it makes it very clear. It says, the Lord says, these people come near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship of me is based on merely human rules they have been taught. So it says they come to me, they honor me with their lips, with their mouths, they sing these songs, but their hearts are far from me. And so this worship for them is merely just a following of human rules that they've been taught. And so it lets us know that worship is not just about singing songs. Worship is about the posture of our hearts when we encounter the presence of God. Now, a lot of times worship does happen when we sing. There's something about music that moves most of us. Have you ever been in a space and you hear, a song comes on and you hear it, and the next thing you know, you're sobbing your eyes out. I'm like, babe, it's fine. I know you love me. I'm amazing. And Drew's just crying and crying. And it happens though that music moves us. I was watching the last episode of This Is Us. And I wasn't even trying to cry. I was adamantly trying not to cry. I'm like, this will be the one episode that I don't shed a tear. And you ever have those tears that you don't even know you're crying? The tears are just falling. You're like, what is happening? Because something happens when we recognize ourselves in the story of somebody else. Or when we hear a song that reminds us of another time and we're transported back to that space and it moves and it stirs our souls. And I think sometimes the entire universe is speaking to us through these moments. It's speaking to our hearts. And when our hearts begin to respond to the moving of the Spirit, I think that is what true worship is. Sometimes it is singing. Sometimes it's tears. Sometimes it's laying down. Sometimes it's obedience. And sometimes it's as simple as taking off your sandals and taking off your shoes and staying a while. And so we're going to jump in today to the scripture in Exodus 3. Now, this is not traditionally a scripture that we talk of a lot when we think about worship, but I was reading through this scripture and it just struck me, the story of Moses. Moses was a young Hebrew man who had been actually running for 40 years at this point. He's about 80 years old, running from Egypt. And he is a shepherd at this point. He's taking care of his father-in-law's flock. And we're going to pick up in Exodus 3. With the story of Moses and the burning bush. One day Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock far into the wilderness and came to Sinai, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. "This is amazing," Moses said to himself. "Why isn't that bush burning up? I must go see it." When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush, "Moses, Moses." "Here I am," Moses replied. "Do not come any closer," the Lord warned. "Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." When Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord told him, "I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. It is a land flowing with milk and honey, the land where the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites now live. Look, the cry of the people of Israel has reached me, and I have seen how harshly the Egyptians abuse them. Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people Israel out of Egypt." But Moses protested to God, "Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt?" God answered, "I will be with you. And this is your sign that I am the one who has sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God at this very mountain." I love that this story takes place for Moses on just an ordinary day. It was an ordinary day like any other day. And to be honest, most of us don't really look forward to ordinary days, except for me. If you guys don't know, my husband and I have been in a long-distance relationship for 16 months, and it just ended finally this week. Yes, so exciting. It's like this is the reason people get married, to live together and do married things, and now we can actually do those things, and we're so excited for everyday normal life. We joke about it all the time. We're like, "Babe, I'm so excited to get annoyed with you over stupid things," and then we can wish that we were back in long distance because we were just like, "Oh my gosh, you're in my space all the time." But I love those everyday normal things, and this week, I spent a lot of time meal prepping. And I was meal prepping, and I was like, "Oh, I get to make him a lunch." I bought him I went to Amazon Prime. I got him a lunch pail, the whole thing. And I'm chopping up all the good stuff. I'm like, "You're gonna eat healthy whether you like it or not." I just slip it in there, And I'm making him a lunch, and I thought, this is so cool. Isn't it amazing how not very exciting, fun things all of a sudden become fun when you're in love? Oh my gosh, we're folding laundry together. This is all I've ever dreamt of. It's actually more you folding laundry and me watching, but you're doing great, babe, But normal everyday things are super exciting when you're doing it with someone you love. Until they're not. Because I imagine that in a few weeks, maybe a few months, I don't know, I just got married. It might be naive of me. It might be tomorrow. That new marriage luster is gonna wear off, and I'm gonna be like, "Pack your own lunch, okay? You can just eat at the cafeteria." Because sometimes the things that we do once out of love and admiration and compulsion, like we can't help but like do these things because our spirit is just so moved by love, and then all of a sudden it just becomes a routine. And I think if we're not careful, there are certain things in our lives that once maybe we did out of love, and once maybe it was the Spirit moving within us, and if we're not careful, it will just become another routine that we do. See, there's a big difference between ritual and routine. A routine is a set of actions regularly followed. A ritual is a set of spiritual actions regularly followed. And if you don't get the irony in that, English teacher here, that's not a big difference, okay? You're talking about a routine is something that you do over and over and over again, but a ritual is a spiritual thing that you do over and over again. So it begs the question, how do you know which one you're doing? How do we know if we are in the routine of church? We just show up and we just go through the motions, or how do we know if it actually is a ritual for us, a spiritual practice that has great meaning? Sometimes it's hard to differentiate between the two. I have consistent routines, right? Let's take coffee shops, for example. I have a very specific routine of going to Dark Horse Coffee. It's one of my favorite coffee shops. Shout out to Dark Horse. Thank you. We keep you in business. And I go to Dark Horse, and this is my routine. I walk in, I have my cup, I take it to the girl, I say, please don't throw out my fancy oils and creams. I know, I'm that person. And she gives me coffee. I say, thank you, I pay. I get my next loyalty star, and then I go, man, I have a problem. I really shouldn't be drinking this much coffee. I need to budget more, and then I walk out and I leave. But that's my routine. I walk in, I get my coffee, and I go. And I was thinking about it this week, and I'm like, how do I transform a routine into a ritual, into a spiritual practice that has meaning? I thought, well, I do the same thing, right? I still go to the coffee shop. I said, so what makes this different? If I want to move from routine to ritual, something has to change. And I realized that the thing that changes isn't actually the thing that I'm doing, it's more the posture of my heart. You know, I go to get my coffee, and maybe when I'm going up, I'm like, man, I am going to make this barista's day. I am going to just be light to this person. Or I go, you know what, everybody in front of me. I'm going to pray for everybody in front, not like out loud, because that could get real weird. I don't want to get kicked out of Dark Horse. They're like, and you may never come back again. But like in my mind, or I go, God, like, would you just bring me somebody to talk to? I know that there's somebody who is hurting, who is lost, who needs a hug from me, who needs to know that they're not alone. And would you bring that person to me? See, the difference between routine and ritual isn't in what we do, but it's in the posture of our hearts. It's, can we see God in our everyday lives and those things that we do? And this is exactly what Moses is doing. This is a normal day. This is a work day for Moses. He's tending the sheep just like every other day, and he's moving and he's taking the sheep out to Mount Sinai. And what I find interesting about Mount Sinai is that it's also called Horeb, and Horeb in the Hebrew actually means glowing or heat. And there were some theologians who supposed that maybe this mountain was actually like an active volcano, and that's why they talked about it as glowing and something that had a lot of heat. And so I thought, well, maybe it wouldn't have been crazy for Moses to see something on fire. You know, maybe it wouldn't have been crazy, but let's suppose for a minute that this was out of the ordinary, and Moses is going about his everyday life, and he's herding the sheep, and all of a sudden he walks up and he sees this. It says, there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. And Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. This is amazing, Moses said to himself. Why isn't that bush burning up? I must go see it. When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush, Moses, Moses. Here I am, Moses replied. I love how it says like the bush was engulfed in flames, but it didn't burn up. And I wonder how long it would have taken Moses to figure that out. How long do you have to look at a piece of wood to realize it's not being consumed? Right? Like immediately you don't look at it and it disappears like that. Like this bush is burning and it takes time for wood to catch fire and to spread. And so minutes, seconds, moments, who knows how long Moses would have had to sit there and watch this bush to notice that there was something happening. But once he realizes there's something happening here, he says, this is amazing. I have to go see this. And what is so profound about this moment is that it isn't until Moses actually walks towards the bush that God calls out to him. It isn't until Moses actually moves forward towards this miraculous sight that God actually calls out to him. And I love that we use this image that God does of this burning bush, and it sounds kind of crazy, right? That he would see this bush and it's on fire and it's not burning up, but it wouldn't have been that unusual for Moses. See, to notice something miraculous happening in his everyday life would not have been bizarre or unique, because the Hebrew people actually had no word for spirituality. The Hebrew word from spirituality that we have nowadays actually comes from the English word for spirituality. Because see, the Hebrew people didn't separate the working of God from their everyday lives. They had no divide between the sacred and the secular. And so it would not have been uncommon for God to manifest himself to Moses in the middle of the desert on a work day. See, the Hebrews believed what it says in Psalm 24:1, that the earth was the Lord's and everything in it. The earth was the Lord's and everything in it. God could be found in the dirt. He could be found in the snow. He could be found in the rain. He could be found in the stars. He could be found even in the trash. Anywhere that people were willing to look for him, God could be found. See, and I think the trick to encountering God is paying attention long enough to what is going on in the world so that we can recognize the supernatural amongst the miraculous, or amongst the natural, that we see the miraculous. Because I think a lot of times, like, the moving of God is so simple. It's right in front of us and we miss it. It's right in front of our very eyes, or right beneath our very feet. And so Moses sees this bush, and he's like, this is amazing. I got to go see it. And it says, when the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush, Moses, Moses, here I am. Moses replied, don't come any closer, the Lord warned. Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And when Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. Moses actually physically changes his posture when he realizes that he's in the presence of God. Moses walks forward and he hears God speak to him. And God says, don't come any closer. He says, this space where you're encountering me is now holy ground. There wasn't anything holy about that particular bush or that particular part of the desert even, but he says, whenever you encounter me, that space is holy ground. And the only thing that Moses can do is physically respond. He takes his sandals off. He covers his face out of reverence and out of respect, a recognition that he was in the presence of God. And then the Lord told him, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt, and I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. Now, this is something Moses would have had intimate knowledge of. He knew what it was like in Egypt. It was where he was born. It was where he was raised. He would have seen the oppression of these people. And so God is connecting to Moses saying, I know what's happening to your people. I have heard their cries. He says, so I've come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. Yes, a lot of other people are there. It's fine. We'll take care of that later. He says, but this land is flowing with milk and honey. He says, this is going to be an incredible new space for them to be free. And he says, now you go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh, and you must lead my people out of Egypt. This is incredible that Moses sees this bush that's burning and on fire, and God speaks to him, and what God speaks to him is actually vision and purpose. He says, Moses, you're going to do this. He says, the Israelites, I've heard them. They've been crying out. They've been in slavery and in captivity at this point for over 430 years. And God says, I have heard them, and we are going to do something about this, and you are going to lead them. And Moses has the same response that most of us have. Me? Huh? What? Me? He says it twice. Who am I? Who am I? But Moses protested. Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? And God answered, I will be with you, and this is your sign that I am the one who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God at this very mountain. God's response to Moses is, Moses, I am with you. It doesn't matter who you are, it matters who I am. And so when I tell you we're going to do this thing, when I tell you that there are people who are hurting, who are broken, who need liberation and freedom, I am with you, and we are going to do this thing together. He's like, Moses, I got you. It's me. I am with you. And a lot of times when we think of worship, it's this word that's made up of two different words. This word worship is wirth, which means worth, but then the skipe, which is the second word, is the shape or the quality. And worship is the quality of having worth. I think a lot of times when we worship, we're saying that God is worthy, that he is so worthy. But in this moment, I also think that what God was saying to Moses is, Moses, you are worthy. As Moses is encountering the presence of God and he's stepping in to this moment, God takes this moment of worship to speak worth over Moses and to speak purpose over him. He says, you are going to do great things, Moses. You are so worthy. You are worthy, and I'm going to use you. And I will be with you. And he says, this is the sign that you're going to know that I was with you. Right? Like, how do you know? How do you know when you come to church on a Sunday and you hear that little voice in the back of your head just saying you're worth it? The thing you're doing, like, you don't need to do that. You're better than that. You're worth more than that. And you're sitting there and you're hearing all the negativity in the back of your head saying, don't do that. I mean, they're going to think you're weird. Don't go up for prayer. Like, you don't need that. We have all these voices in our heads when we come to this space. But God says, no, you're worthy, you're worth it. And this is how you're going to know. It says, when you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God at this very mountain. It says, this ground that you're standing on right now, you're going to come back here. And in 100 or so days, when the Israelites have been set free and you're wandering through the desert and you make it back to this mountain, you're going to stand on this mountain and you're going to know that it was God that was with you, because you're going to see what I did. That thing that I told you that I was going to do when we last met here, the next time you come here, you're going to know that I did that. And you're going to know that it was me, and you're going to know that I was with you. And I thought, man, Moses had to wait so long to come back to Mount Sinai. So much happened between the moment he encountered God and then the time that he brought the Israelites back. But we get to do this every Sunday. Every Sunday, we get to come forward into a space that we have set apart as a time to encounter God. And we get to let God speak vision and purpose and healing over us. And then he says, hey, guess what? You know how you're going to know that that's me? When you go do that thing I put on your heart, when you go do that thing this week that I told you to do, and you come back next week to this very space and you worship me, and you see what I did. So you see what I did over this past week, and you're going to know that it was because I was with you. But do we approach Sundays as that sacred time? When was the last time that you approached worship and you thought, man, I have got to hear from God today? When was the last time that you walked into a space like this and you thought, God, like, I need you to speak to me? And if you're in that space, welcome. This is an amazing place to encounter God and to have God speak vision and purpose and life into you. But if that's not you and you don't feel that, is it possible that you've gotten stuck in the routine of church? And just the routine of worship, that you show up sometimes maybe on time, sometimes maybe a little late, and you sit in the back and you check it off your box and you leave before the last song ends because brunch is waiting. But do you know what you're missing out on? Do you know that there's a living God who says that when you come into this space and you recognize my presence, you see that simple, mundane thing, that burning bush that Moses saw and said, wow, that is amazing. When you feel that stirring in your heart and you pause, and you go, wow, that is amazing. I haven't felt this in a while. I haven't sensed this in a while. That person that just talked to me out in the lobby, at first I kind of thought they were crazy, but man, that's amazing. That person just saw me. They recognize that I have value and I have worth. And when we step into worship with this posture of, God, you are worthy, but also, God, we know that you long to use us. And so speak vision into my life, speak purpose into my life. And then next week I'm going to come back and we're going to check in. And we're going to see all the amazing things that you've done. And I don't know about you, but that's not always my posture to worship. I can come into worship and I can sing the songs and we can raise our hands and never actually encounter God. We can praise him with our lips and our hearts can be far from him. But are you willing to stop long enough to recognize that maybe if we can reclaim that ritual of worship, if we can start to find God, the miraculous within the mundane, that he could begin to speak to us. So if you bow your heads with me, we're going to pray and then we're going to have a time of worship today. Yes, we're going to sing some songs, but I'm also going to invite you into a space that goes beyond just singing. Like Moses, I think it's so important that our posture actually alters, that we physically respond to what God is doing deep in our souls. And I love Jeremiah 29:13. And God is speaking to Jeremiah. He says, you will seek me and you will find me when you seek me with all your heart. And I know that my heart doesn't necessarily beat the same as yours. And I can't tell you what with all your heart means, but I think you know what with all your heart means. If you don't sing, maybe try singing. If you've never actually sat long enough to let God speak to you, try being present. If you've never raised your hands as an act of surrender, there's nothing magical about the difference between your hands by your side and your hands up, but it does indicate the posture of our spirits. It's an indication that we are in a space of surrender, saying, God, I need you. And if you need God, why not let him know? And I know maybe what some of you are thinking, but what if they see me? I mean, yeah, I want to go worship, but what if it's weird? I might want to go down for prayer, but what if people judge me? What if they're, what are they going down for prayer for? Oh, they must be really messed up. Yeah, I get it. Maybe you're insecure. Maybe you don't have a good voice. Who cares? Because are you willing to miss what God has for you because you're so aware of yourself? Because worship is not being aware of ourselves. Worship is about becoming aware of the presence of God in any space that we find ourselves in. Do we believe that this space, this middle school floor, could actually become holy ground? That when we step in and say, this is God, this is the Spirit of the Lord, this is his presence, that we actually invite his presence here. So we're going to start singing, and I just want you to sit for a second. Just want you to sit in this moment. I ended my talk early. There's no need to rush out. I did it on purpose. We're going to sit for a moment, and we're just going to listen to these words. And I just want you to begin to feel the Spirit stirring. As you become more aware of what God is doing, as you become more aware of his presence.
You are listening to the Makers Church podcast. For more information about our community, please visit makerschurch.org.